On October 25, 1995, a unique event took place on the Career Track campus in Boulder, Colorado. It was a live presentation of the best-selling book, Chicken Soup for the Soul. This one-time event incorporated the authors, Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, along with actual contributors to the books, telling their own stories, live dramatic interpretations, and the improvisational music talent of Ken Miedema. It was a day of laughter, tears, and recognizing the power and joy contained in the human spirit. So join us now for Chicken Soup for the Soul, live.
If you read Chicken Soup for the Soul, you're going to read a lot of stories about people living their dream. So I want to tell you my story. I was born blind, as was my sister, who is 3 years younger than I. And if you were born blind in 1943, when we didn't know so much about what blind people could do, you could expect to live most of your life dependent on somebody else's charity. You know, you could expect to live most of your life maybe working in a sheltered workshop or being taken care of by somebody. But I was a different kind of a kid because I was surrounded by some people who didn't have that kind of a vision. I was surrounded by parents who did not ever, for 1 minute, let me wallow in self-pity. I had a teacher in elementary school. I remember her very well. I went to a special class for the blind, and every time I would display those blind mannerisms, you know, you've seen stereotypes of blind people putting their hands in their eyes and rocking back and forth and doing all these things. Every time I would display those mannerisms, she would come up to me and she would whack me on the back of the neck and say, "You, child, are living in a sighted world. Get used to it." So then there was the music teacher who said, when I was the age of 8, she said, "You are going to be a world-class musician, and I'm going to be sure you get there." Not me. And there were people in high school who encouraged me, who befriended me even when it was difficult. I mean, people think weird things about blind people. When I was in high school, there were people who thought blind people couldn't hear. I actually had people come up to me and say, "Can you read my lips?" There were people in college who showed me the campus. I went to college 2 weeks early, just so I could memorize the campus. And there were people who took hours and hours and hours out of their time to work with me, help me memorize the campus. After my college years, I decided that my whole life ought to be one long expression of gratitude to the people who had helped me, who had made it possible for me to have a good life. So I began working as a music therapist, and I worked with disabled children and troubled children and psychiatric patients in a hospital. And I did that for several years after getting my master's degree in music. And then for the last 20-some years, I've been on the road singing. I've been doing concerts all over the world because I've been wanting to say thank you to the people who made my life possible, who made me believe in myself. And I've been wanting to say to all the people who were in my audience, you can do that too. You can, you can, you can. One of the stories that typifies my life, I guess, I was 30 years old, and I was well established in my career as a singer, and I had gone to a party. This is at one of the locations I was doing a concert. Went to this party. And there were a bunch of kids at the party, young teenagers, and it was a 1950s party, so they were playing a lot of 50s music, which I loved because that was when I was in high school. And this 14-year-old girl named Nancy walks up to me and says, "Would you dance with me?" And I said, "Well, you see, well, that is when I was a kid, just blind kids didn't dance, kind of like white men don't jump." And so So I never learned to dance, but I am doing better about my self-image. I've gotten accustomed, I've gotten to like my body now, and I feel more comfortable, gesturing. I had movement therapy, and I feel good about my body, and I really like this body I'm in, and I don't have any, theological or problems with dancing. I just never learned how. Well, Nancy would take none of that. This 14-year-old kid looked up at me, said, "You're gonna dance with me now." And I said, "What'll I do?" And they were all watching me, all the kids in the room watching me. So I stumbled out on the dance floor, and I knocked her over, and I knocked myself over. I stepped on her feet and my feet and everybody else's feet. But I had a wonderful time. And so to all the Nancys who've made my life wonderful, and to all those who will make your life wonderful, and because you are Nancys who will make somebody else's life wonderful, this. You asked me to dance, and I'd never tried dancing before. I had visions of everyone laughing me right off the floor. No, I protested, it just wouldn't be any good. You gently insisted, and finally I told you I would. Yes, I told you I would, yeah, yeah. Well, I was walking down these hallways, trying to learn my name. I was all dressed up in a business suit, trying to hide my shame. Seemed like everyone was watching me, and I felt naked and exposed. Yes, I did. Something deep inside me shouted, this is not the life I chose. No, no, no. I was feeling like a stranger in the concrete jungle land. You came up beside me and you reached out for my hand. I could tell by the way you held me that you were a stranger too. All at once I found myself dancing in the dark with you. I will fly with the wings that you gave me. With your hands held in mine, I can run to the mountains and the rivers and the valleys and the plains where shadows can play in the sun. I will walk down the roads of confusion. I will crawl through the caverns of pain. Just to dance with you and I get my life back again. Oh yeah. Just like you told me I would. Well, now, I don't know how you did it, but I don't even care. You're exactly what I needed. Somebody who's really there. You see, I locked up all my windows, which you opened with your smile. Yes, you did. And I can't believe you said to me, come on, boy, get up and dance a while. I was feeling like a misfit. I didn't know what to say. Feeling like a blind boy who'd gone and lost his way. I could tell by the way you held me, you were a misfit too. And all at once, I found myself dancing down the road with you. I will fly with the wings that you gave me. With your hands held in mine, I can run to the mountains and the rivers and the valleys and the plains where even shadows can play in the sun. I will walk down these roads of confusion. I will crawl through the caverns of pain just to dance with you and I get my life back again. That's all I wanted was just one dance Ooh, could have danced all night and begged for just one dance. Can't believe you got me out on the dancing floor. Just one dance. Oh, let me take it to you just one more time. Just one dance. All I wanted was just one dance.
You know, it's interesting. Not every one of us has a Nancy that's going to ask us to dance in life. So sometimes we have to invite ourselves to play, to get out on the dance floor, and not to wait. Because as we've seen earlier and we'll see later today, if you wait, sometimes you miss the opportunity. Now, there are other opportunities that come along, but that opportunity never comes along again. And once you decide what it is you want to do, you've got to persevere. You've got to hang in there and stick with it. Many of us take a look at the obstacles we face. And there are obstacles in all of our lives. Sometimes they're lack of money, lack of resources. Sometimes there are real things out there that can stop us in a way and slow us down. And we face them and we proclaim ourselves defeated. We give up our dreams too quickly. And at least some of us do. And there are others that are probably taking what's certainly a more difficult path than many of you have chosen, and yet they keep on going. And Glenn McIntyre is one of those people who seizes life with both hands. He's a police officer, he's a husband, he's a speaker, and he's a nationally ranked tennis player. And since being hit by a drunk driver at the age of 23 and having his back broken in 17 places, he's now a paraplegic. He's also one of the most positive and inspirational guys we've ever met.
I've always been an independent person. When I was about 5 years old, I had a dream that someday I could go across country on my own motorcycle. It seemed like I would be so free, and I would enjoy just being out on my own. And I never knew if I was going to realize that dream. But when I was 10, I started working jobs on a regular basis. By the time I was 15, I'd saved up enough money to buy my first motorcycle. At first, my parents said I couldn't have a motorcycle. Then I got them to agree that if I bought a brand new motorcycle, paid completely for it, along with a full coverage 1-year insurance policy, and bought all the proper safety equipment, that I could have one. Nobody believed I could do it, but I did it. And on the day I got my learner's permit, when I was 15, I went to the Honda shop, and they showed me how to ride the motorcycle in the parking lot. After about 15 minutes worth of figure eights, I drove away. At home one night, I read a motorcycle magazine, and there was an ad in there for a BMW motorcycle. This motorcycle was covered with mud, and there was a rider next to it looking very tired, and behind him was a sign that said, "Welcome to Alaska." And I thought, wow, what a journey that would be, to go to Alaska. And it became a dream for me. A lot of people said I shouldn't make the trip. I was only 17 years old. But I said, here's my chance to go across country. 1 year later, on my own 1,000cc bike, I took a photo of my bike with even more mud on it and more duffel bags on it in front of the exact same sign in Alaska, "Welcome me to Alaska." It was such a great trip, and I think about how close I was to not doing it. I'm so glad that I jumped at the opportunity, that I did it right then, and I didn't put it aside and wait till later to do it. I would have never done it. I have to use a wheelchair now. There's no way I could make that motorcycle trip. And when I think of other things in my life that I might have put aside, that I might have missed forever, I'm so glad that I did them. So my advice to anyone, including myself, and what I take all the time, is when you have an opportunity, even if you're tired, even if it's hard, even if there may be some difficulties to it, do it, and do it now.
You know, when I started out as a professional speaker, I was probably 10 years into it, and I'm up in Oregon, and I'm doing this great talk, and this guy comes up to me, and he's got 25 people in the room, and I don't really know who he is, but he says, "I want to hire you." I said, "Well, I like to get hired." And he said, "Why don't you come over to McMinnville, Oregon, and talk for my companies?" Well, I'm there, and I'm doing 6 talks for him in one day, including the university, including where his kids go to school, all kinds of stuff, plus all of his various and sundry companies. I'm sitting in the office with this great guy, Del Smith, who I think is the greatest living philanthropist in America now. That'd be my judgment of him. And he said, you know, Mark, when I was a little kid, I was orphaned at 7, and Grandma Smith took me in. Now, she gave me a copy of this crazy little book, Think and Grow Rich, and I read it, and I didn't know exactly what to do with it, but I thought, you know, she and I are living alone, and she didn't have much money, so I'll go down to a bank, and he went into the bank and borrowed $2.50, and he went across the street, borrowed $2.50 more, and he bought a lawnmower. Started cutting lawns, he said, the size of a golf course, is in the 30s, and he got 15 cents a lawn. By the time he was 11 years old, he saved enough money. He bought Grandma Smith a house with $100 down, 30-year financing, 2% interest. Back in McMinnville, Oregon, you could do that then. You can still do that now. No, that's not true. That's not true. He finishes his story in saying, you know, Mark, the trouble is that kids can no longer borrow money from a bank. And I didn't mean to be a wise guy or be flip, but I said, Del, why don't we start a kids bank? And then they took me on a tour of the helicopter operation. He's the guy who created the helicopters that go straight up and have a jet pack that goes 250 miles an hour forward. I come back after about an hour tour, and a senior vice president who's a love of a lady and just, you know, got the same kind of vibration of people that work at Career Track do. And she said, Donna Nelson said, good news, Mark. I said, what's that? She said, Del Smith just started the Mark Victor Hansen Children's Free Enterprise Bank, funded it with 25 grand. He'll put in more if we need it. I said, did I promise matching funds? I was in awe. So we've got this little children's free enterprise bank, and we'll lend money to kids anywhere in the U.S. and Canada, and I expect we'd do it around the world if we had somebody to help them a little bit. But we do it for free enterprise, not to go to college. So I'm over in Huntington Beach, California. A kid comes up to me and shakes my hand. He'd been in the audience with his parents and said, I'm Tommy Ty. I want to borrow money from your bank. I said, well, that's good, son. I'd like to lend it. What do you want to do? He said, since I was 4 years old, I had this dream in my mind that I could cause peace in the world. I said, I can get behind that. What do you want to do? He said, I want to do a bumper sticker that said, peace, please. Do it for us kids, signed Tommy. I said, that's hot. Now, you heard what I taught. You got to figure out what you want, not really, because that's what you got, but what do you want ideally? And then you got to put it in writing, and my cliche is don't think it, ink it, delegate it to document. And you got to visualize it, and you got that. And then you got to mastermind it. You got to have 2 people together to help you, and if your parents are into it, great, and if they're not, I'll score for you, and I'll be your mastermind buddy, because 2 come together and have the power of 11. Well, his daddy brings him over, and his dad's a lovely blue-collar man, and I'm lending him $454, and the check's written to a bumper sticker company for 1,000 bumper stickers. His dad whispers in my ear, if Tommy doesn't pay back, are you going to foreclose on his bicycle? I said, look, knock on wood, every kid, as far as I can tell, is born with honesty, ethics, and morality. They got to be trained different to do it wrong. And I said, that's why Del and I started this kids bank. I mean, Del put up the money, and I put up sweat equity, and we lend a lot of money to kids, and they're all good about it. And then we give them all my books and tapes. And this kid had no better sense than to really get into it viscerally. He listened to every one of the tapes. Now, to say that he was slow academically would be an understatement. His mom, before I'd given him the tape, said, if you get an A, every A you get, I'll give you $5. Well, the next year, after listening to tapes, getting this little bumper sticker company going, getting positive recognition, he got 458 A's. His mother didn't think it was such a good promise. Well, Tommy listens to the tapes, and it says start selling at the bottom or the top. It says sell at the top. Ronald Reagan has just come out of the White House. He has his dad drive him up there on a Saturday morning, rings the doorbell, gatekeeper comes out, sells the gatekeeper one of those little bumper stickers for $1.50. Gatekeeper says, hold on, kid, I got the former president. This is good. Ronnie comes out, shakes his hand, says, understand you're causing peace in the world. He said, that'll be $1.50, Mr. President. I said, why did you ask him to buy? He said, you said ask everyone to buy. Gorbachev was still president of Russia. Sends one to Gorbachev, unsolicited, with a bill for $1.50 US. Gorby sends it back, a check for $1.50 US and a signed autograph picture that says, go for peace, Tommy, signed President Gorbachev. I said, Tommy, I collect autographs. I'll give you $500 for that. Tommy said, no thanks, Mark. I said, you know, I own a couple companies, and you're the greatest little salesperson I've ever met. When you're a little older, it'd be my great honor to hire you. He said, are you kidding me? When I get older, I'm hiring you. Now, Jack and I live in a state with the most population in America, 33 million people in our great golden state of California. More than Canada and more than Australia. The Register, the second biggest paper, does a Sunday feature section on Tommy, the kids bank, and myself. Journalist interviews this kid that's supposed to be slow, and he couldn't stop the kid from talking. Tommy talked to him for 6.5 hours, Marty Shaw, the writer, told me. And he asked him some really profound questions that filled this copy. He said, Tommy, who are your heroes? He said, my dad, George Burns, Wally Joyner, and Mark Victor Hansen. Kid's got good taste. He said, what do you think your impact will be on world peace? He said, I don't think I'm old enough yet. I think you got to either be 8 or 9 to stop all the wars. Well, the next day I get called by a guy who owns a company that you've memorized his little unique selling proposition. It says, when you care enough, you send the very... Yes. Joyce Hall, the founder and head of Hallmark, calls up and says, Mark, this was just faxed in and it really touches me. I got 11,000 franchisees and basically none of them have goals. And you got Tommy to set his goals. Now remember when you're 6 years old, you got wide margin paper and you got a big thick pencil and Tommy writes, meet Mark Victor Hansen. Hit him up for a loan, offer baseball cards as collateral. Number 10, sell 1 million bumper stickers. He says, I want you to book him. I, at that time, owned an agency that booked speakers called Look Who's Talking. I don't anymore. And he says, I said, I don't have a contract on a little kid. He and I are best friends, and I'm his mastermind partner, but I haven't got a contract on Tommy. I said, tell you what, I got a conference phone. I'll press a button, I'll dial him. But in deference to you, Mr. Hall, he doesn't know that you're running the world's biggest paper enterprise and you did $38 billion last year, and he doesn't understand any of that, so he may be rude. I just got to caution you. He said, I'm a great-grandfather. I can handle it. Dial away, boy. I said, yes, sir. We get Tommy on the phone, and it gets time to negotiate. Tommy says, Mark, define negotiate. I said, that's where we ask for the money. He said, oh, good. What are we going to ask for? I said, $2,000. Tommy says, not enough. Oh, God. Isn't that good? Isn't it nice to be naive and young and innocent? Next day he gets called by Joan Rivers. She still got her show out in New York. Said, Tommy, this was just faxed into me, and I want you in my show. I'm going to pay you $300. Tommy said, that's real nice, Joan. Parentheses. She doesn't know he's been listening to these sales tapes, and he's a master. End of parentheses. Said, Joan, you know, I'm just a little kid. I can't come alone. You'll invest enough money to pay for my mom to come with me, won't you? She said, I guess I could do that. Said, I've been watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and on there it says you ought to stay at the Trump Plaza. You can get us a room there, can't you? She said, I could do that. Says you ought to go to the Empire State Building and Statue of Liberty, and you'll get us tickets, won't you? She said, yeah, I guess. Said, now, Mom doesn't drive, so we can have your limo for the day, yes or yes, you know. Well, he goes on his show, and he's supposed to be on for 5 minutes. And because he's so authentic and he's got such great stories, he met 2 presidents, he talked to all the baseball players. He's in the middle of the show and he says, you know, Joni, I owe my buddy Mark $30 a month. And as I remember it, you haven't paid me $1.50 for that bumper sticker. You are going to pay, aren't you? And he puts out his hand. Well, she's crying and she pulls open her purse and she's pulling up money and the cameramen are shooting each other, pulling up money, and the whole audience is ready to pay this kid because he's so great. Well, 25 minutes has evaporated. The executive producer is losing it. He is over there going, cut, get that kid out of here. There's been no commercials. Joan wipes her eyes one more time, leans in and says, come on, tell the truth, Tommy. You really think that bumper sticker can cause peace in the world? He said, so far, Joni, I got the Berlin Wall done. I'm doing pretty good, don't you think?
One of my new friends is a man named Monty Roberts, who lives just a little bit north of Santa Barbara in a little valley called the Santa Ynez Valley, and it's a place where a lot of horse ranches are. And Monty has a thoroughbred racing horse breeding business up there, a place called Flag Is Up Farms. And a few years ago, he let me use his ranch to do a fundraiser to invite people with last names like Crocker, Pillsbury, Seagrams, Goodyear, some people that had never made any money in their life. And had him come over to the ranch, and he threw one of these Texas-style barbecues. And after the barbecue, he led us into his living room, and he was going to let me do a little pitch so we could raise money for the foundation, which I started, that takes programs into the inner cities and takes programs into prisons. We have a program in San Quentin Prison, the Maryland State Prison program, to help prisoners learn the kind of things we're talking about here today. We take programs into the inner city schools and the homeless shelters, but to do that, we need to raise more money than I've been able to generate and fund the foundation with. And so he was introducing me in his living room after we'd had this barbecue, and he said, I want to tell you why I support the kind of work Jack does that empowers youth. And he said, when I was a kid, I was in high school, and there was this other kid that was in high school just for a brief time because his dad was an itinerant horse trainer, and they lived out of the back of a pickup truck. on one of those little camper van things that you go fishing in, but you don't really spend your life living in, except they were. And they had no real money, and they lived hand to mouth, and he never spent more than a month in any different school district because he would always be traveling from one ranch to another, from one part of California to another to find work. And he said this boy was in his class for about a month, and they were writing English papers, and the teacher assigned a paper, and the topic was, I want you to write a paper about what you want to do and be when you grow up. So this boy got really excited. This was a topic that really engaged him, and he had a dream that he wanted to write about. So he spent 2 hours that night writing ferociously about his dream. He wrote more pages on that than any other assignment he'd ever done. And he also drew a diagram of a 200-acre ranch that he wanted to own. Where would you put the racetrack and the bunkhouses and the tack rooms and the stables and the main house and so forth. And then he drew a diagram of a 4,000-square-foot house. I don't know if any of you ever did that. And you'd lay in study hall, I'd be there diagramming my ideal home. And so he did all that, and he handed it in. He was really proud of what he'd done. And he got back the paper a week later, and it said, F, see me after class. And he went up to the teacher, and he was shocked and heartbroken, and he said, how come I got an F? This is my dream. Teacher said, young man, my job as a teacher is to save you from growing up and being disappointed. This is an unrealistic dream for a boy like you. There's no way you could ever grow up and own your own horse ranch. Did you realize what land in this valley costs? Do you realize what breeding stock costs and what the going stud fee rates are today? He said, you're living out of the back of a pickup truck. You have no assets, no capital, neither does your dad. You can't afford to go to college. You don't have the grades to go anyway. What makes you think you could ever own your own horse ranch? And so this little boy went home after the teacher had given him an option. He said, look, if you rewrite this paper and you hand it in, I'll give you a week. And you write a more realistic dream for your life, I'll give you a higher grade. Just trying to save you from some pain in later life. Well, the boy went home and he said to his dad, Dad, what should I do? This is my dream. But I want to get a good grade. He said, son, it's your life. I can't tell you what to do. You have to decide. But I will tell you, whatever you decide is probably going to change the rest of your life one way or the other. So it's an important decision. So the boy struggled with that decision for the next week. Should I, shouldn't I? What should my dream be if it's not this? After a week, he went back to the teacher and he handed him the exact same paper. And he said to the teacher, look, you keep the F. I'm keeping my dream. And then Monty Roberts, who was telling us the story, walked over to his fireplace, and on the mantle he pulled down a framed piece of paper. And on the paper in red ink it said, F, see me after class. And the name on that paper was Monty Roberts. And that year his after-tax income was about $6 million. I've been in his study, and there's a picture of him with the last 4 presidents up on the wall. He's done incredibly important things with his life, and he's made a big difference in the lives of many, many children because he opens up his ranch to kids to come camp on. And one day, that same teacher brought a bunch of kids to camp on his property, and he admitted to Monty he had made a mistake, and he apologized for doing it. Monty said, no problem. But that's the kind of guy he is now. He gives back to the community. And see, it's important not to let other people steal your dreams. Your dreams are in your heart. We believe that God or higher power puts them there so that you know what it is you're meant to do. And if you believe in your dreams and you see clearly the ending you hope for, you visualize that dream, you close your eyes and you see that ranch, or you see the school you want to start, or you see the body weight you want to be at, or you see the income you want to have, or the contribution you want to make to the world. If you do that every day, it kicks in a part of the mind. And all of a sudden, the unconscious kicks in and starts to move. And will bring to you all kinds of opportunities. You'll see things you never saw there before. And you'll get creative ideas, as Mark and I talked about earlier when we were talking about marketing the chicken soup books. That vision aligns you.
Jack and I do a training, and one of the trainings that we do together has giant signs come up. And one of the signs that comes up that hitchhikes on this is, the doctor said I'd never walk. My mother said I would. I believe my mother, Wilma Rudolph. Just gets you. I mean, there's so much potential because what you believe is what you achieve. And my motivational teacher, Cabot Roberts, said, as long as I can run, I'll run. And when I can walk, I'll walk. And when I can only crawl, I'll crawl. But so help me God, I'm going to keep moving forward. And that's how it is for us as parents. And, we're always looking for the right gift to give our children. And obviously that right gift is the presence of your great beingness. But maybe that gift is also the willingness to keep believing. And the believing that Jack and I are recommending is that you see more in them than they see in themselves. You see them as they can be rather than as they are. Well, one of the rare people that never lost the gift to believe is our dear friend Florence Littar. She's not only a much sought after speaker, a beautiful woman, but she's a highly recognized and best-selling author. She's been filled with the appreciation that life spreads to everyone that meets her. And if you get in her energy orbit, she'll tell you stories about her family that will just enchant you, elate you, and take you to the next level. And the story you're about to hear is a present she got from her own father, and she shares it with great love and dignity and elegance.
I grew up in 3 rooms behind my father's store in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And I remember my senior year in college when I came home, and I stood in the store with my father, and he said, "Come in the back room for a minute, I want to show you something." And I went back into the little den behind our store, and he reached in behind the upright piano, and he pulled out a little old cigar box. And I looked at that box, and I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, open it and see." And I opened it, and I looked inside, and it was full of newspaper clippings. And I remember asking him, "What are these?" And he said, "Well, look at it." And I did, and I was amazed to find out that he had written them. And I said, "I didn't know you could write. Why didn't you tell me you could write?" He said, "Well, your mother said that because I didn't have much education, I shouldn't try to write." So I never did, but then I realized that within me I had a real desire to write. So when your mother was out one day, I sat down and I began to write, sent the article into the newspaper, and they published it. And I thought, well, I'll do it again. So I wrote more, and I've been saving them up over the years, putting them in this box. No one knows about this box. I'm giving this to you, the evidence of what could have been, if only someone had given me some encouraging words. We tucked it all back in and put it behind the piano, walked back into the store, and as we did, my father put his hand on my shoulder and he looked at me and he said, "Florence, I guess I tried for something too big this time." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I wrote an article for our denominational magazine on how they should change the method by which they selected the nominating committee for the National Convention." And he said, "I thought it was the best thing I'd ever written." But he said, "They've never put it in, and it's been over 3 months. I guess your mother's right. I don't have any talent." Those were the last words my father ever said to me, because the next morning he and my mother went to Boston for the first day off they'd had together in 20 years. And as they were walking through Park Street Station at the rush hour time of traffic at 4 in the afternoon, heading for the subway, my father dropped to the pavement. My mother looked down, didn't know what to do. A nurse came through the crowd, looked up at my mother and said, "He's dead." My mother came home alone on the train, alone on the bus. We had no car, no phone. And we looked out that night, and here was my mother coming across the square to our little store alone. And she walked in, and we said, "Where's Daddy?" And she said, "He's dead." At the morning of the funeral, I was going through the greeting cards that people had sent, and I noticed among them the denominational magazine that my father had mentioned. I took it out. I never would have looked at it at that time except for what my father had said. And I have that magazine, and I opened it up and went through it, and there was my father's article, "For More Democracy, Walter Chapman." It came the day of the funeral. I look back on that and ask myself, was my father's life wasted? I'm so grateful he showed this to me, because I have that article framed on my wall, and every time I write just one more book, I look at my father's article, I remember the box, and I realize the value of an encouraging word.
It was a beautiful fall afternoon, and I was out working in the yard. And all of a sudden, my son, Nick, he's 5 years old, he tugged at my pants, and he asked me if I'd make him a sign. Now, this was a very big deal, because Nick, you see, had decided that he was going to go into business. He said, "Dad, I'm going to sell some of my rocks. I'm going to sell them for $1 a piece." Now, I'm a very proud father, and I have to tell you that well, Nick is one of the cutest kids on earth, and I think he's one of the most intelligent. I like to think he takes after me. But, I mean, selling rocks, garden variety, pick off the ground kind of rocks for $1 a piece, I thought that might even be above old Nick there. So, being a good father and feeling particularly wise that day, I thought I'd just give him a little advice, a little wisdom, send him on the right road. So I said, "Nick, nobody in their right mind's gonna buy a rock for $1. All right, so that's the extent of my wisdom, but I did feel pretty strong about it. Well, he looked up at me and he said, "Oh, yes, they will, Dad." And with that, he just went right down the driveway to the street, and he was pulling his wagon behind him with a bucket full of rocks and a big basket that he said was going to carry all the money. Well, I watched him go, and I thought, well, this is just something that Nick's going to have to work out on his own. So I went back to work, and I was keeping an eye on him, and kind of thinking of something to say to him to kind of help the disappointment. When all of a sudden, a car drove slowly down the street. And there was a young couple inside. They were probably going to go see the house for sale at the end of the cul-de-sac. And they smiled at Nick as they passed by, and he waved at them, and they went on ahead. And then Nick went on looking for the rest of his customers. Well, in a couple of minutes, this car pulled up and it stopped. A nice-looking young lady just got out, and she went over to Nick's rocks, and she looked at them. She selected one. She gave Nick $1. Well, as they drove away, Nick started running toward me, and he said, Dad, I told you I could sell a rock for $1. He says, if you believe in yourself, you can do anything. Don't you hate it when they're right like that? I mean, he'd stuck to his plan. He believed in himself. Well, that night, we decided to go out to dinner, and on the way to the restaurant, Nick asked if he could have an allowance. I guess this was the day to talk about money. Now, my wife, who was a good and wise woman who happened to escape completely this whole rock incident, she said to Nick, well, Nick, if you want an allowance, you're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to work for it. Well, Nick said, well, that's okay. How much will I get? Now, my wife, she said, well, I think a boy 5 years old, I think $1 a week would be a good allowance for you. Nick said, $1? Obviously taking pity on us for our foolishness. He said, $1? He said, I can get that selling a lousy rock.
One of the key things that we need to understand about living our dreams is that they change. We've got to allow them to change and evolve and grow and become something today that they weren't yesterday. Our dreams are adaptive. They change as we change, which is good because it throws a lot of curveballs, and curveballs get you to grow.
And if you can't hit a curve, you're never going to be able to make it in the big leagues. As our friend W. Mitchell says, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it.
I was burned severely in a motorcycle accident in San Francisco. I was on my way to work. A laundry truck ran through a stop sign. There was a collision with my motorcycle. The gas cap came open, and I was burned over 65% of my body. I went on from that experience through great difficulty, through great challenges, through great disappointments, agony, the whole thing, but ultimately, thanks to an insurance settlement, moved to Colorado, got a place in a beautiful little town in Colorado, and started a company with some money that I had and built some businesses, and things were really rolling and life was really getting good. The company became enormously successful, and 4.5 years after the burns, I was flying. I was literally flying because I had a pilot's license, owned a plane, and life was really good. I had everything you could imagine. And I had an airplane accident one day, and I broke my back and became paralyzed, and was told I'd never walk again, and told I'd have to use a wheelchair to get around for the rest of my life. And what I have learned, and what I suspect most people ultimately learn, is a lot of stuff happens in life. And sometimes this stuff is as dramatic as the experiences that I've had, which have resulted in being burned and being in a wheelchair. Or sometimes they're very unvisual experiences. For instance, I know, and we all know, lots of people riding around in mental wheelchairs. Lots of people who are crippled, confined, disabled by emotional experiences that have left no visible traces. I know a lot of people with internal scars that are more severe and more debilitating than having short fingers or a slightly different appearance. And what I learned, not in some great flash or some great Shazam, but in trial and error, is that we have phenomenal resources. And if I can take responsibility for the bounce check or the failed business or the relationship that didn't work or the miscommunication with the kids, if I can take responsibility, recognize that within me is the ability to respond to the situation, then I can do anything. I met a young guy in the hospital, maybe 2 months after I was paralyzed, who had really hung it up. He'd just quit. He'd given it up. His life was over. There was literally nothing left for him to do. Everything that important to him was taken away. He was a mountain climber, an athlete, a 10-speed bike racer, and he would never do any of those things again. And he was just phenomenally depressed, which is very understandable. People get depressed over less important things. And finally one day I went over to him and I said, you know something? Before I was paralyzed, there were 10,000 things I could do. Now there are 9,000. Yes, I have the option. I could spend the rest of my life dwelling on the 1,000 that I've lost, or I could focus on the 9,000 that are left. And in your lifetime, if you do even a few hundred of those things, you'll be one of the most remarkable people on the planet. I told him it's not what happens to you. It's what you do about it.
I could cycle all the way to Alaska, but I know I better do it now. 'Cause if I wait until tomorrow morning, I may miss my chance somehow. I know that I can bring peace to the world, and I'll start before this day is gone. If I wait until tomorrow, my golden chances may be gone. You see, I'm bound to live this dream I got, even without a second string. I'm bound to walk a higher road, fly on eagle's wings. I could have a ranch in the valley, even though you want to nix my plans. One of these days you'll bring little children to go camping on my land. And I'll sell you rocks for $1, and I'll write for a magazine. I'll learn how to be a handyman when I fix your back door screen. I'm bound to live this dream I got, even without a second string. I'm bound to walk along this higher road. I'm bound to fly on eagle's wings. I'm bound to live this mighty dream I got, even without a second string. I'm bound to walk along this higher road. I'm bound to fly on eagle's wings.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the age of 9 months, illness took from Helen Keller the ability to see and to hear. Without those two resources, she remained mostly mute. unable to clearly speak for the rest of her life, that she could have easily allowed herself to stay locked in a dark silence, alone, untouchable, and defeated, but she didn't. With the dedication of her teacher, Annie Sullivan, and the unending support of her family, Helen Keller broke out of her shell, graduated from college, became a writer, a movie producer, an advocate for the blind and for the deaf, and an admired public figure. Helen Keller knew what it was to try, and she knew what it was to overcome. What she said was the marvelous richness of human experience would lose something of rewarding joy if there were no limitations to overcome. The hilltop hour would not be half so wonderful if there were no dark valleys to traverse.
Now, often we think of overcoming obstacles as not being able to see, not being able to hear, losing our ability to communicate or to walk or to run. But for many people, and for many of us, the obstacles are most troubling are issues of the heart and thoughts in our own minds.
Dottie Walters, one of our oldest and dearest friends, is an author, an editor, a publisher, and a speaker. And today she lives in a beautiful house that has the love and the support of her family and a career that challenges her and brings her joy. Now, it would be completely wrong to say that Dottie has always been a success, but it would be true to say that she has never, ever known failure because she has chosen not to.
Perhaps you think it's strange to see a soda fountain in someone's office, but this one has a story, and I'd like to tell it to you. When I started my business in Baldwin Park, California, advertising, I bought space from a little newspaper and resold it, each paragraph, for 50 cents more than it cost me. And my goal was to make the house payment. I didn't have a car, but I did have a baby stroller made for one child, had 2 children, so on the back of it I tied bed pillows with clothesline rope. I wore my shoes out, but I cut cardboard and carried extra pieces of cardboard with me. Well, my darling husband saw how hard I was trying to help to make that house payment. Times were rough, and so he was able to find an old Model A car, not an antique, just a clunker. And so I was able to hire a babysitter, the girl next door, and go out and pick up more ads. Well, one rainy afternoon, I had 4 ads sold, and that would have completed the house payment for that month. But when I went to each of those stores, they each told me, no, we're not going to advertise with you because Mr. Ullman, who is the president of the Chamber of Commerce, runs the drugstore, is not advertising. So your advertising must not be any good. So I thought, I better get down and see Mr. Ullman. Now, I tried, and he was never there, not for me. Not on the phone, not in person. But when I walked in this time with my newspaper in my hand with my column in it, there he was at the back of the room. And I walked back there and said, Mr. Ullman, please look at my newspaper column. People in this town respect you so much. Would you just give me an opinion I can give them? Would you look at it for me? And he turned his head like this. And his mouth made a U upside down. My heart sank. I thought we were going to lose the house. I just didn't know where else to turn because I'd gone a long way already to try to find some way to help my husband. Well, I started back for that old car out in front, and I got as far as the soda fountain, and I just ran out of breath. I sat down for a minute, and then the soda jerk came up to me and said, yes? And I was trying really hard not to cry and hang on, and I looked in my purse, and all I had was a dime. Last time I had. Later, I realized it was the best investment I ever made. So I bought a cherry Coke. And just at that moment, the lady sitting next to me, beautiful gray hair, turned around with a sweet smile and said, what's the matter, honey? And I said, I'm going to lose my home. She said, tell me about it. I showed her the newspaper, told her about my working in my high school newspaper and my journalism teacher. She took it out of my hand and she said, you drink that Coke, I'm going to read this. Well, she read every word. I remember that I got down to the bottom of the glass and it gurgled, the straw made it gurgle. And then she jumped down, spun around, and said, Reuben Ullman, get out here. It was his wife. I didn't know he had a wife. And she said, you buy advertising from this girl. Sit down here next to her, and I want you to buy it every week. And she said to me, you give me the names of those 4 merchants. I'm going to go get on the phone, and we're going to get this column going for you. They were my dear friends all the years until they finally closed the store. And when they did, my husband went down and bought the soda fountain. So if you come to Glendora, California, I'll pour you a cherry Coke and invite you to sit next to me and turn every opportunity to advantage, even if it takes your last dime.
In 1933, a director in Hollywood wrote this memo after watching a screen test of a potential new talent. Can't act, balding, can dance a little. The actor in that test was Fred Astaire, who said later he kept that memo over his fireplace in his Beverly Hills home.
Now, an expert, and we all know what an expert is, it's somebody from 50 miles away from home. Well, an expert once said Vince Lombardi possesses minimal football knowledge and lacks motivation.
Nobel Prize winner Albert Einstein didn't speak until he was 4, didn't read until he was 7. His teacher described him as mentally slow, unsociable, and adrift forever in his foolish dreams. Einstein was expelled from one of his schools and refused admittance later to the Zurich Polytechnic Institute.
Henry Ford failed, went broke 5 times, and finally succeeded.
When Peter J. Daniels was in the 4th grade, his teacher, a woman by the name of Mrs. Phillips, constantly said to him, "Peter J. Daniels, you're no good. You're a bad apple and you're never going to amount to anything." Not exactly positive reinforcement. In fact, Peter was totally illiterate until he was 26. And then a friend stayed up all night and read him a copy of Think and Grow Rich. Today, Peter owns street corners he used to fight on and has just published a new book. It's entitled, "Mrs. Phillips, You Were Wrong."
Peter's book is right now the #1 bestseller in Australia, and he's a great friend of ours. 18 publishers turned down Richard Bach's 10,000-word story about a soaring seagull. After great effort and a lot of disappointment for this author, the book was finally published by Macmillan in 1970. By 75, Jonathan Livingston Seagull had sold more than 7 million copies in the USA alone.
Abraham Lincoln entered the Black Hawk War as a captain, but by the end of the war, through diligence, hard work, and plenty of innovation, he had been successfully demoted to private.
When we think of successful people, for some reason we assume they've always been successful. Well, nothing could be further from the truth.
It all began for me in an unlikely town called Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which I sometimes kiddingly say has been renamed in my honor Loose Jaw, considering the amount of talking I've done in the last 65 years. I was not just born in Moose Jaw, I was abandoned there and left by unwed parents without a name, without much of a future, in a little northwestern town in Canada. An older couple in their middle 50s, named the Linkletters, happened to be coming through because my father was a combined shoemaker and evangelist touring Canada from his home in Prince Edward Island, and they adopted me. They were childless. So I was really brought up by grandparents. And we were poor. I never remember getting anything I didn't work for. My early days growing up in San Diego, where we eventually moved because my father, as a Baptist minister, found a place where we could have free lodging in, of all places, an old folks' home. So I spent part of my youth in an old folks' home. Kind of interesting, considering that these days I lecture on old age is not for sissies. But at all events, my youth was spent working and scrambling, hustling, and hitchhiking. And so when I graduated from high school at the very tender age of 16, being small and young, I decided that rather than go on to school and be lost in a generational skip, I would go out and see the world. And since I had no money, and I had a friend named Denver, Colorado Fox, we started out hitchhiking. We hitchhiked up to Walla Walla, Washington, starting out in June, and there we found that it was faster and quicker to go on trains. So I became a hobo, riding freight trains, and jumping on and off lumber cars and sleeping in refrigerator cars. One of those times, I was in a lumber car at night. It was raining outside. We were in a division point where the train wasn't moving, and suddenly my friend and I heard some rustling noises, and coming through the darkness were 2 dark, big, shadowed men. striking matches as they came. And when they saw us, they pointed a big pistol at us and said, "We'll take all the money you've got." Well, that was a scary situation. And in a moment or two, as I was fumbling around in my pockets for $1.10 that I had, my buddy had a couple of bucks, the match went out. And in the darkness, I heard the click of the revolver. And I thought that anything could happen. Up to that time, I was worried about perhaps being attacked by older men sexually. Now it was life or death. In a few moments, another match lit, and instead of firing at us or hurting us, one of them handed me back 25 cents or so and said, here's money for breakfast. And they vanished in the darkness. At that moment, I was thinking of my father, who, when he left me on the roadside, starting out on this road, said, "Artie, I'll pray for you, and I know that God will take care of you." He was a very devout man and had given me a lot of faith that the Lord does watch out for us. Well, time went on, and I had many other adventures, came back, studied, went through school to be a school teacher, and then got into radio broadcasting and discovered that by interviewing people and inventing game shows and talk shows and stunt shows, I could be paid for talking. It's been a wonderful life. I have a wife that I've been married to for 60 years. I have had 5 children, 8 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren. I've been in radio and broadcasting more than 65 years. I've interviewed 27,000 children on My Kids Say the Darndest Things, and I am very proud and happy to say that in America, you can start from zero and you can go places. And you can be an orphan without a name, and you can make it. And if I did, I think out there, you can too.
One day when Art was doing Kids Say the Darndest Things, he says to the little kid, "What did your mommy say not to say to me?" She says, "Wherever it itches, don't scratch." We love Art Linkletter, and he's been bringing joy to people around the world for over 60 years. At age 83, he still travels over 250,000 miles a year, skis 5 times a season on the most difficult double black diamond slopes, and he's planning years ahead. For Art Linkletter, it has been and continues to be fun and easy, and for some people, it is neither fun nor easy, but it still needs to be done, especially if you're a teacher who cannot read. Watch what can happen for you.
People look at me as successful. I graduated from college. I taught school for 17 years. I've been married to the same woman for 30 years. I have a family. I've had a business. I'm a builder and developer. I've built and developed over $50 million worth of real estate in Southern California. But I never felt like I was successful until I was 48 years old, when I started learning how to read and write and spell my native language, English. I accomplished many, many things, you know, and when I hear people say that I was successful, I never, ever felt that successful. And when people ask me, why couldn't you learn to read? What happened to you? And I have to tell them the story about what's happening to millions of children and millions of people in America. About 25% of the population learns to read like birds learn to fly. And it's like walking and talking. It's normal and natural. They forget. It's like being potty trained. I mean, do we remember that experience? Our parents might remember it, but we don't remember it. We just get it. And 50% of the population learns to read when they're in the 2nd to 5th grade. Their parents have an influence, their families have influence, brothers, sisters, and they just get it. And there's about 25% of the population that have difficulty with processing language. When I share my story, I talk about the little boy that went to school when he was 6 years old, and for 6 years of his life, his mother and father told him he was a winner. There was no drugs or alcohol in my family. I did my chores. I did what my parents asked me to do. I went to school in good faith to learn the ABCs and to read and write and the timetables, as most children do. We are innocent, and we go there. And I ended up in the dumb row in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. I don't know how I got in the dumb row. I was placed there because obviously now, in retrospect, the deficiencies in basic skills. I couldn't, and I didn't learn the alphabet until I was in the 5th and 6th grade. So it is a traumatic experience to be an illiterate in America now. As I've learned to read and I sort of go back and heal the emotional healing, I have some sub-personalities that I identified and spoke to and named, not like 3 Faces of Eve or multi-personalities, just for the purpose of communication. And this is part of what I share with teachers when I share my story with them. There's a little boy inside of me that sat in those dumb rows, and he is named Johnny the Innocent. And when I asked him if I should go share our experience, he said, and I can call him up. All I have to do is talk about him. And the pain of being labeled dumb or inadequate can still come up. And I'm 57 years old. And I can think about him. And as I said, I had these conversations, and I said, what do you think? Should I share the story? And in his innocence, he said, by all means, go tell the big people. If they know, they'll fix it.
Can you imagine how difficult it was to learn how to read when your brain is fighting you every step of the way and everything doesn't make sense? And how difficult it was for him to finally admit that he couldn't read. After being a school teacher for 17 years, after graduating from college, he would find out what tests there were that always used multiple choice tests, and he would just go in and take his best guess. It had to be 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, or C. He had his secretary read him his mail. He said, my eyes are tired, just read me my mail. And he bluffed his way through, and he told his wife, I can't read. And she thought he meant that he didn't like to read or he had difficulty reading, not that he couldn't read. And after he learned to read, he said the greatest reward was that he went into his bedroom and he took out of his bedroom closet up above where the suits hang down a box. And in that box were all the love letters his wife had written him over the years. And this was the first time he was ever able to read them. Amazing man. Courage comes in many forms and in many places and touches many people. And earlier we heard from Dottie Walters, a friend who showed outstanding courage in the face of failure. And we're lucky now to have a pair of stories, this time not only from Dottie, but from her daughter Lily, who's also a best-selling author in her own right. These 2 stories really illustrate courage, the ultimate power of belief, and the importance of realizing a purpose in life.
My grandmother told me that angels come down and give us messages. And I could see them flapping with their wings, maybe delivering a letter like a special delivery mailman. And she said that the angels come knocking at the door of your heart, but the door is bolted on the inside. And she said, honey, you got to throw that bolt and open it up, and the angel will stand there. And I said, do I say, come in, Grandma? Come in, angel? She said, no. Angels don't come in. They just deliver messages. And they never say hello. Why not? I asked her. And she said, because the angel message is arise and go forth. Do something with the message you've been sent. Well, I was having a very hard time remembering that message when our daughter Lily was hurt badly in an accident. My husband was driving a forklift back to where he'd rented it, and the steering mechanism broke, and it fell over, knocked him out, and landed on her left hand, and it smashed it. You know, if it had cut it, maybe they could have sewn it back on. But if it's smashed, then gangrene set in. And so it was operation after operation. And I was very, very down, as any mother would be. I kept thinking of things she'd never be able to do. Well, she finally got back to school. And I was able to get a book that was the one-hand typing chart. So I went in and to find the typing teacher. She was too young, but I asked him, would he help her? Well, all around the room, he had quotations. I read a lot, and I hope you do. My friends of the mind, Benjamin Franklin and Amelia Earhart and Lindbergh, and everybody who's accomplished anything are my friends of the mind. And here, the room was lined with quotations. He said, sure, I'll help her, Mrs. Walters. Have her come at lunchtime. And so he did, and I said, honey, should I put a little nail polish, a special cap so you can find that home position? She said, I don't need it, Mom. And before any time had passed, she was doing 50 words a minute, and her English teacher was angry. Now, he was angry because he thought I was doing the typing for her, babying her. He had had polio, and his right arm, he had to move it like this with his hand. He had no use of it at all. So he said to her, don't you dare let your mother do your homework. She said, I'm not. She said, I've got the one-hand chart, and I have learned to type. He said, oh, really? That's my dream. That's my dream. I've never been able to learn to type. She said, come on over at lunchtime. Well, she came home that very day, and she said, Mom, I'm not handicapped anymore because I'm able to help someone else. And I thought, oh, finding that book, that typing book, was like opening the door. It was the message. And you know, something wonderful's happened because of the chicken soup books. People from all over the world have written to us and asked where they can get that book. They're therapists, they're parents, they're ministers, and we've located it. So if anybody has anyone who's lost a hand, we can help you. Just get in touch with us. And maybe you'll hear the angel knocking at your door too. And when you do, throw the bolt. And the angel message will be, arise and go forth.
For Lily Walters, overcoming the loss of part of her hand was only the beginning of the story. And it's certainly only a tiny part of her overall life. But it's funny how things turn out and how we often take an unexpected turn along the road and meet someone who needs our help, and we find out that a potential handicap actually becomes a gift to somebody else.
You know, sometimes you look back at your life and you say, why does that have to happen to me? I'm quite lucky now that I'm able to do quite a bit of theater, musical theater. It's just my love and my hobby. And we were doing a musical night, and I was doing an operatic piece from Porgy and Bess. But I seemed to hurt my throat somehow, and I was worried that I was actually straining it trying to do this particular piece. So I just, out of the phone book, chose a throat doctor and went into him, and the nurse brought me into the examining room, went away, and then she came back a few minutes later. And she said, I need to ask you something personal. And I thought, well, what else do they ask you in a doctor's office except for something personal? And I said, well, of course. And she said, I've just had a baby. And my baby's hands are like your hand. I want to know what it meant to you in your life. And I thought, oh, okay. What it's meant to me in my life. I mean, people have often asked me, gee, what happened? No one had ever said, what has it meant to you in your life? And I thought for a minute, and I said, are you asking me how to help your baby? Is that what you want to know? And she said, yes. And I said, well, when I was hurt, I was so lucky to have a family around me that instead of saying, oh, you're hurt, this is an awful thing, they found all the things that I could be excited about in my life. My mother said, you know, you're going to be one of the few people who can play a guitar with one hand. Chord it this way, strum it like this. Now, I'd never played guitar before, but I thought, gee, that sounds exciting. She said, everyone's going to be so envious that you can do this. So I learned how to play guitar. She said, you're going to be able to type with one hand. Have you ever heard of anybody that can type with one hand? I'm sure there were thousands of people, but I had never heard of anyone. This was an exciting thing. She would call different people from the press and the media and say, my daughter can type with one hand. She made it a wonderful, exciting thing. My whole family was there finding the positives about it. And I said, you know, you with your baby, you're so lucky. Your baby doesn't know she's handicapped because she's been born this way. She is just who she is. The only reason she's going to feel handicapped is if you see her as handicapped. Just show her how wonderful life can be, how exciting she is as a person. She thought about it for a minute and she had a tear in her eye, and I hope it's because it was the right thing. I was so nervous, I'm not sure if I did say the right thing to her. She left. The doctor came in a few minutes later and wanted to do this test on my throat that just sounded awful, and I said, look, let me get back to you about this later. I walked out of that doctor's office, and within about an hour, my sore throat was gone. Never came back. Never had one like it since. You say, why do these things happen to you? Maybe I was sent there that day for a reason. Maybe I got hurt in the first place because that child is going to go on and do something wonderful. Maybe that child's going to go touch somebody else. Who knows? But isn't it nice to think that things do happen for a reason?
The reason we wrote Consider This is because we think, like what you just heard from Lily, is that most of our souls have been underestimated. And we're about to tell you some more underestimations of the human soul.
Success and perseverance go hand in hand, and most people don't know, but Winston Churchill failed 6th grade. He did not become Prime Minister of England until he was 62, and then only after a lifetime of defeats that might have destroyed lesser individuals.
Walt Disney was fired by a newspaper editor for lack of ideas. Went bankrupt multiple times and went on to build Disneyland, which has been built and rebuilt now by Michael Eisner.
General Douglas MacArthur was turned down twice for admittance to West Point before he finally got admitted on his 3rd try. He later graduated at the very top of his class and marched into the history books.
In 1944, Emmeline Snively, director of the Blue Book Modeling Agency, told a young hopeful by the name of Norma Jean Baker that she'd better learn secretarial skills or get married. And if you don't know it, Norma Jean never learned to type, but as Marilyn Monroe, she did okay.
And in 1959, a Universal's picture executive dismissed both Clint Eastwood and Burt Reynolds at the same meeting. He had some hard news for both of them. To Burt Reynolds, he said, you can't act. To Clint Eastwood, he said, you have a chip on your tooth and your Adam's apple sticks out too far. And you talk too slow. You're just not good looking enough. Now, there's a second part of the story that we didn't even know when we first wrote Chicken Soup, but learned later. As Clint and Burt walked off the studio lot, Burt started grinning. Well, Clint wanted to know what was so funny. After all, they had both just been told that they had no future in show business. So all in all, the day wasn't going so well. No, you have no future because you're ugly, Burt laughed. At least I can learn how to act.
You're so great. In 1953, Julia Child and her 2 collaborators signed a publishing contract to produce a book tentatively titled French Cooking for the American Kitchen. Now, if you're old enough to remember, in the 50s were not the high point of American cuisine, so publishing a book on French cooking was a pretty bold move. Julia and her partners worked on that book for 5 years. Publisher then rejected it. They put back together another one, revised the manuscript. Publisher rejected it again. In fact, the contract for the book was terminated. She found a new publisher, went for another 8 years starting again on the project, and wrote a book called Mastering the Fine Art of French Cooking. It sold more than 1 million copies, and if you've ever seen her on TV, she is still in fine form. And what I love about her is that if her souffle flops, she laughs with us.
And in 1962, 4 young musicians, or so they claimed, played their first record audition for a group of executives at the Decca Recording Company. The executives, who were also experts, were not impressed. We don't like their sound, said one executive. Besides, groups with guitars are on their way out. History tells us that those musicians were the Beatles. Doesn't mention who the record company executives were.
At a very young, tender age, a girl was told that she had epilepsy. She sucked it in and toughed it out, and her daddy was a morning jogger like Jack and I are, and one day she said, Daddy, what I want to do is I want to run with you. Daddy said, honey, that would just touch my soul if you'd run with me. But she says, what if I have a seizure? I said, honey, if you have a seizure, I know how to handle it. And they started running and they got into it, and one day she looks up at Dad teary-eyed and said, Daddy, I've considered what I really want to do. He said, what's that? He said, what I want to do is break the world's long distance running record for women. Well, Daddy looked in Guinness Book of Records and found out that it was 80 miles. Little Patty Wilson said, we're going to break it, Dad. As a freshman, we're going to run from Orange County, California to San Francisco, 400 miles. As a sophomore, I'm going to run all the way to Portland, Oregon, 1,500 miles. As a junior, I'm going to St. Louis, Missouri, 2,000 miles. And as a senior, I'm going to run from coast to coast all the way to the White House. I'm going to shake the President of the United States' hand, and I'm going to say, epileptics are normal people with normal lives. Well, she did that first 400-mile run, and it was almost effortless. Second time, she's en route to Portland, and they're running and running and running. And all of a sudden, midway in the run, she fractures a bone in her foot. Goes to the medical doctor, and the medical doctor says, look, Patty, we need to put a cast in that. We need to put you out. She said, Doc, this isn't some little ambition with me. She says this isn't some whim. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for everybody else. Now, what you got to do is you got to figure out a way that you can keep me mobile. He said, let me think. Okay, there's one. I said, what is it? He says, we'll wrap it in adhesive bandage. But the trouble is it's going to be incredibly, incredibly painful. And I guarantee it's going to blister. Are you sure you're willing to do this? I said, Mom travels behind Dad and I in a motorhome. Mom's the nurse. She knows what to do with blisters. She'll pop them because I'm going to run. Well, her classmates got behind her and they did a giant banner by the time she got back to school, and it said, run, Patty, run. And that not only became the banner that took her around the country, but it also became the motto of her book. And the next year she runs 3,500 miles with her dad at her side every mile, just like always. It took 4 months from coast to coast. They get to the White House. She gets to shake Jimmy Carter's hand and said, I just wanted people to know that epileptic people are normal people with normal lives. And they hugged and they kissed. And she was on the front page of almost every paper in America. Super Run finishes coast-to-coast run. Now, the story would be good enough if it ended there. But I'm doing a meeting for Allstate Insurance Company. Big galoot of a guy comes up, puts out his meaty hand. He's got tears in his eyes and says, I'm Jimmy Wilson. You're talking about my little girl. And he says, what you got to know is because of her noble efforts, we've raised enough money to open up 19 multi-million-dollar epileptic centers around the country. Now, if she had so little and did so much to outperform herself, the question is, what can you do?
Playing tennis is easy, unless, of course, you want to be good at it. Roger Crawford is good at it. In fact, he's so good at it, he was nationally ranked as a player when he was in college. Roger had the psychological and inner-born talent gifts that he needed to play, but what Roger didn't have was a leg and 2 hands.
One of the reasons that I got involved in speaking and writing was because of my own personal life story, having a physical challenge. Political correctness tells us that we should say physically challenged instead of disabled or handicapped. We used to say people are bald, now we say their hair disadvantaged, or their hair is in retreat, or they had a crew cut and their crew bailed out. But I guess I'm most comfortable with inconvenience. This physical challenge affects all 4 of my limbs. The medical term for what I have is called ectrodactyly. I have obviously 2 fingers on my left hand and 1 finger on my right hand, 3 toes on my right foot, and a partially developed ankle. And I was unable to walk until I was 5 years old. I wore a rather cumbersome and awkward brace on my left leg, and the bottom half of my left leg was amputated when I was 5, and then I could be obviously fitted with an artificial leg, which then enabled me to walk. But I guess as I look at my life, and the more that I learn about human behavior and human potential, I think we all have challenges. Some are real, however, most are imagined. And I really believe that the handicaps that disable us, if you will, are the ones from the neck up. I believe that in our lives, no matter who we are ultimately the product of our choices, not our circumstances. I believe that optimism is so critically needed today because that's something that we can choose. We can choose our thoughts. We can control the quality and the content of our thoughts. Optimism is the foundation for resilience. The definition of resilience is returning to original form. In other words, the ability to bounce back in the face of inevitable adversity, which we're all going to face from time to time. Another critical component of the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity is having a sense of humor. I was a football player, and I played defensive end, and for people that are listening or watching that don't know what a defensive end is, basically when the other team has the ball, you're trying to rush in, tackle the quarterback, or tackle the person with the ball. So I got into position, and the quarterback went back to pass. The play started to develop. This defensive end on my team rushed in and tackled the quarterback before I could get there. The quarterback hit the ground, the ball bounced into the air, and I caught it. The end zone was in sight. I was going for a touchdown. And I was just running down the sidelines. Everyone was cheering for me. At about the 10-yard line, a young man on the other team caught up with me. I remember seeing his eyes through the face mask. He dove for a shoestring tackle. Well, he pulled and I pulled. He pulled and I pulled. Well, he pulled my artificial leg right off. But I hopped for a touchdown. You see, you gotta be flexible and fluid. I was quite involved in tennis growing up. Tennis was critically important for me because it gave me something that I could point to, something that I could identify and say, yes, I do that well. It became my passion, my sense of purpose. If I could go on a tennis court and compete equally with someone who was able-bodied, I was in their eyes, but probably more importantly in my eyes, equal. We all have to find that in our lives. We've all got to find our passion. You know, during my career, I've played John McEnroe, and that taught me that a positive attitude does not work every single time. A message that I would like people to take from this segment is that the essence of their life is not far different than mine. Their ability to bounce back, their level of resilience, I guarantee you, is equal to or greater than mine. I believe that everyone has an internal boldness. They have a resilient inner resources within them. And the good news is that they can tap it, and it's up to them. Remember, what defines our life, it's our choices, not our circumstances.
Listening to our dear friend Roger gets you out of a pity party. And you all know that if you're in a pity party, the only thing that happens is you get to be pitiful. Our friend Roger is a great author, highly sought after speaker, superstar athlete, business trainer. He way out married himself. He's got an absolutely gorgeous wife that he adores, and he can still best most of us at playing tennis. So I'd ask you not to try. He is an achiever, and he competes at everything that he does, and he operates at a very high level like we're encouraging you to do. And for lots of people, you know, physical gifts define who they are. But it's really not what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens to you and how you use those gifts. Next guy we're going to talk about had the same kind of problem. Roy Campanella, one of the greatest baseball players of all time. Playing behind the plate, Campanella was named the National League's most valuable player 3 times in his 9-year career. Gifted with grace and power, he showed us how to do 242 home runs, led the Brooklyn Dodgers to a world championship, and in 1958, at the peak of his baseball career, all that was taken away from him in one auto accident, and it almost took his life and left him a quadriplegic.
We're a rugged breed, us quads. If we weren't, we wouldn't be here today. We're blessed with a spirit and savvy that isn't given to many. Down in the reception room of the Institute of Physical and Medical Rehabilitation, over by the East River in New York, there's a bronze plaque that's riveted to the wall. During the months of going to the Institute for treatment 2-3 times a week, I must have rolled through that room 100 times, but I never took a second to pull over and read the words on that plaque. Words that were written, it is said, by an unknown Confederate soldier. Then one afternoon, with the pain from exertion, from the muscles that would not work, from the arms and legs that could not move, I stopped, I read it. Then I read it again. And after reading it for a second time, I was near to bursting. No, not with despair, but with an inner glow that had me straining to grip the arms of this wheelchair. The plaque said, I ask God for strength that I might achieve. I was made weak that I might learn to humbly obey. I asked for health, I might do great things. I was given infirmity, that I might do better things. I asked for riches, that I might be happy. I was given poverty, that I might be wise. I asked for power, that I might have the praise of men. I was given weakness, that I might feel the need of God. I asked for all things, that I might enjoy life, but I got a life that I might appreciate all things. I got none of the things I asked for, but I got all of the things I hoped for. And almost despite myself, my unspoken prayers were answered. I am among men most richly blessed.
Come and sit by my soda fountain, and I'll pour you a Coke or two, and we'll speak of the overcomers who did what they had to do. It's the boy who sat in the dumb row and buried his pain inside, and he finally learns how to read, and now he's got nothing at all to hide. It's the woman who sits in the forklift and bids her hand goodbye. Sure, she may have lost her hand that day, but her spirit will never, never die. And it's run, Patty, run across the country, from sea to shining sea. And even the sky is not the limit when your dreams have been set free. Could it be that there's an angel come to visit you today, who says, go forth with the overcomers, and God bless you on your way.
If you would like more information on Career Track products, please call us toll-free at 1-800-334-1018. And from all of us here at Career Track, thanks for watching.